I've got good news for you today. It's good news that has been good for my own soul. And whether you're here in person or you're online, we're glad that you're here. Would you open up to Hebrews chapter 2? Let me talk to you about where we're going to go and why I think you want to listen today, because this is good news and we need it. There's so many things that divide us as humans. There's a lot of things that we're going to see not eye to eye on. We don't have in common. We don't see the same POV. However, there is one thing that we absolutely have totally in common. Everybody here is going to die. Now, that is not necessarily a really happy thing, and that's not the good news, although it really, as a believer, it is pretty good news. But the reason I want to talk about death is because that's really where the writer of Hebrews is going to go. Don't forget, part of what the author is intending here is to say, you have access to the fullness of the estate of the Father. And don't miss that. He's bringing us to glory. Y'all, think about this. Do you feel glorious this morning? Did you wake up and look in the mirror and say, good morning, glory? Like, I'm guessing you probably didn't, because more often than not, we wake up and we go, and we know what we're living with. And we know that's limitations, but I'm telling you, sisters and brothers, and by the way, if you're here today or you're watching and you don't really have a connection to Jesus, I'm so glad that you're engaging with us here. You can engage Jesus fully even today. And he wants to make you into this glory-filled creature. Here's what I want you to hear this morning, and I think this is what the author's trying to say. Jesus became perfectly like us. We often think about Jesus and his divinity, and we can't miss that. Jesus is fully God. But I think at times we can often miss that Jesus was often fully, perfectly human. And not just for 33 years while he walked the earth, Jesus' humanity is with him for the rest of eternity. That's powerful because it's going to make a big difference then in how we relate to Jesus. He became perfectly like us. And last night I lay in bed, and as I lay in bed, this next verse ministered so deeply to me. And I offer it to you also. Listen to this. Because Jesus, we have one source, we have a common humanity. Jesus is perfectly human. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Don't we do things? Don't we have patterns in our life that just make us ashamed of ourselves? And I'm like, man, if I were Jesus, I'd be like, I'm ashamed of that guy. John, you're a mess. But he's not ashamed to call us sisters and brothers. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things. If you haven't figured it out yet, here's what I'm trying to communicate. Jesus became perfectly like us. And he understands us and all of our shame and our weaknesses and doesn't despise us. Look, Jesus became perfectly like us, and because he did that, he was able to perfectly deliver us. Jesus perfectly delivered us. Delivered us from this fear of death and this lifelong slavery to worrying about it. Let's look at the second half of 14 and 15 for a moment. Through death, Jesus might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. At this, the writer of Hebrews is obviously remembering the cross of Jesus. That at the cross of Jesus, Jesus said, I will go to that cross, though I had done nothing worthy of death. In Romans 6:23, we see that the wages, what we earn when we sin, is death. And death is separation. And Jesus knew, if I go to the cross, I will be separated from the Father, but I will do that. I will endure that suffering so that I can bring many people to glory. And through the cross, through his death and his subsequent resurrection, he destroyed the power that the enemy had over death. We as believers go from life in this world to life in the next world. And then he says, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Not that we won't taste physical death, but we'll never experience a second spiritual death, which is separation from the Father. And then he asks the poignant question, do you believe this? And that's what I would ask all of us today. Like, do you believe this? Is this like, yes, not just like I know it, but like in my gut, I believe this. To anyone who would grab onto Jesus, Jesus perfectly helps those people. He perfectly helps us. So if you've seen it so far today, Jesus became perfectly like us. And Jesus perfectly delivered us from the lifelong slavery to the fear of death. And now he says that he will perfectly help us in the midst of our difficulties. And the high priest could go in once a year after making atonement for the people, and he could face to face with God, representing the nation of Israel. And it says Jesus is now our high priest. This could only happen once a year, and week after week, month after month, they would have to offer these sacrifices. Jesus offered a sacrifice at the cross of himself once for all time. And he is, don't miss, the kind of high priest Jesus is. And again, we'll explore this more in a couple weeks. He is faithful and merciful, and out of order, merciful and faithful. Number one, he's merciful. Jesus is a high priest who sees exactly what's going on inside of you. The worst thoughts that you have, the worst moments, he knows them intimately. But far from being a God who is there just to hurt or punish, he said, I'll take the punishment for your sin. He's merciful, and he is now faithful. Faithful to bring many sons and daughters into their inheritance and glory. For because Jesus himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. I found a quote. It's from a pastor. He's Brian Clark from Lincoln Berean. If it's really true that the God of this universe, who created everything, who is at the center of everything, actually took on human flesh, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Because that's who he is. That's his essence. That's his nature. He did it in order to make payment for sin, in order to conquer sin and death. And he's the trailblazer. He's the champion. He's the founder once and for all, that we might follow the path and experience his salvation. He did it in order to make his children glorious. He did it so that one day he can stand with his children and say to the world, I just want you to know, I'm just so honored to call these people my children. But until that day, he's the one who can identify with our struggle. He felt the pain. He lived the struggle. If all that's true, then remind me, what is it that you're going through today that just somehow is too much for God? And if it's not Jesus, where are you going to look? Where are you going to turn? Who are you going to turn to? And if this is true, can't we collectively say in our hearts, in our most difficult moments of life, no matter how hard it is, we do believe Jesus Christ is enough.